The worst thing you can do is draft someone at their ceiling, right? I mean, if you draft someone and there's not too much upside to improve, but there's only risk with that selection, how the hell do you expect to win your fantasy football league? So what I want to do here is I want to go and look at wide receivers that I think are way too risky for their current ADP and don't really have the ceiling people are chasing. Starting up with our first guy in, Kadarius Tony. Now, with Tony, obviously, it's not going to be as bad as he was over the past 2 years. Tony, over the past 2 years, has averaged the wide receiver 80 finish from a points per game perspective. And I think Kadarius Tony will be better than the wide receiver 80 this next year. But the question is, will Kadarius Tony be worth a 6th round, a 7th round selection in fantasy football drafts? Because right now, if you're headed over to Underdog Fantasy, Kadarius Tony is going essentially in the same range as Michael Pittman, Mike Evans, Treylon Burks, Jordan Addison, Jahan Dotson, Gabe Davis, as well as George Pickens. And the reason being is twofold. One, you have a phenomenal situation in Kansas City where you have the best quarterback play in the entire NFL, plus not a lot of target competition. Yes, you have Travis Kelce, clearly the top dog of the tight end position in the NFL, but Kelce's pushing 34. Wide receiver, you had Sky Moore, who greatly disappointed in year one. You have Marquez Valdes-Scantling, that's a field-stretching wide receiver. Rashee Rice, who by no means is some elite-level prospect. So the depth chart is wide open to be the wide receiver 1 for Patrick Mahomes now that Juju Smith-Schuster is off to New England and obviously Tyreek Hill is in Miami. So that's the first bullish sign that people have for Kadarius Tony. And the second one's going to be his yards per route run or targets per route run, whatever efficiency metric you want to be looking at from a per route perspective. And I'm not going to lie to you, this actually really intrigued me after his rookie season for Kadarius Tony, where as a rookie, he posted 2.2 yards per route run, which is an incredible mark. And that only got better this past year. Kadarius Tony was at 2.8 for his yards on a per route basis this past season, which is an elite, and I repeat, an elite efficiency metric. You are only looking at Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and A.J. Brown to be as high as 2.8 yards per route run on a minimum of 45 targets this past year. And if we go down a little bit further and look at 2.5 yards per route run for everybody who's had at least 45 targets, you're looking at elite wide receivers across the board. I mean, you have Jalen Waddle, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Christian Watson, Devontae Adams, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Chris Olave. So those are the reasons why people are pumped on Kadarius Tony. Now, you'll notice Tony did not make that list, right? And what was the reason Kadarius Tony did not make that list? It's because Kadarius Tony isn't a real wide receiver, or at least has not been used as a traditional wide receiver really at any point of his NFL career. Kadarius Tony was more so a gadget option this past year in Kansas City, and he had no volume whatsoever. You're going to see this when we expand this mark out and we look at all wide receivers that had the minimum of 15 targets and how this data can become skewed very easily when you're operating with such a small sample that we have with Tony. Because once we expand that down to anybody with 15 or more targets, hell, Laviska Shenault is tied with Tyreek Hill for the lead in the NFL. Laviska Shenault also ran more routes than Kadarius Tony this past year. Laviska Shenault also had more targets than Kadarius Tony this past season. So are you that excited about Laviska Shenault going into this next year? Of course you're not. Of course you understand Laviska Shenault's not a full-time player. You're going to look at the rookie tight end in Tennessee from this past year. You're going to see that Rashid Shaheed is on this list as well. You had Rashad Bateman. So once you expand that list out, you're going to get these rare instances for a player that has absolutely no volume giving you an elite metric, right? It makes sense. When you're operating with small samples, wild things are going to happen. Now, you'll see that Kadarius Tony was pretty much just a gadgety type special teams player that had a good punt return in the Super Bowl that a lot of people remember by looking at his intended air yards on a per game basis. His intended air yards per game this past season, 12. He was at 12. He just wasn't used as a wide receiver. Now, what I also wanted to do is I wanted to go over to RotoViz and look at all year 2 wide receivers since the year 2000 to average less than 20 receiving yards per game, to average less than 2 receptions per game, and to average less than 2.5 targets per game. Now, out of all wide receivers since the year 2000 that were in their second season, there were 236 of these players that were similar to Kadarius Tony in year 2. Now, out of those 236 players, how many were able to go out there and average at least 50 receiving yards per game in year 3? 6. 6 were. That's about 2 to 3% of that entire sample. That list included Demaney Douglas. I don't even know who the hell that is. Jerome Simpson, Steve Johnson, Ronald Curry, Greg Davis, Bryce Butler. And out of those guys, one of them, out of the 236, averaged more than 70 receiving yards on a per game basis. So you are looking at an expected hit rate for Kadarius Tony to go out there and average over 70 receiving yards on a per game basis of roughly 0.5%. It's going to happen 1 out of every 200 times. Now, I will say Tony got the short end of the stick. He was traded halfway through the year, blah, blah, blah. So maybe his odds are better. Maybe they're 100% better. Maybe they're 200% better. Hell, maybe they're 1,000% better because the situation's so much better going into this next year. Well, even if they are 1,000% better, you expand that 0.5% to 5%? It's a 5% shot of hitting 70 receiving. I just don't understand it. Give me Mike Evans. Give me Treylon Burks. Give me Jordan Addison. Give me Jahan Dotson. Give me Michael Pittman. Give me any other wide receiver here not named Kadarius Tony. Now, going over to our next guy, I understand this is going to get people really upset. Now, a lot of people understand that Kadarius Tony is overdrafted in fantasy football. Someone that I don't want to say hated on for years, but I've been a wet blanket for years, has been Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is a wide receiver that a lot of people view as an elite level talent for a couple different reasons. Terry McLaurin has a phenomenal jump ball. He is able to make highlight contested grabs, and he is able to go on SportsCenter, and people are really excited to watch him. So that's one reason a lot of people are very excited about Terry McLaurin. Another reason is his Madden rating. I guess every single year, Terry McLaurin on Madden looks to be a top 10 wide receiver. I mean, hell, right now, if we're looking at Madden ratings for 2024, Terry McLaurin has a higher rating than A.J. Brown. And I guess this makes people think that he's a good option in fantasy. Well, let's look at Terry McLaurin since he's come into the NFL. Terry McLaurin has never finished higher than the wide receiver 21 from a points per game perspective. He's never finished higher than the wide receiver 21. Now, Terry McLaurin is going to be turning 28 this September. So you're looking at a wide receiver whose ceiling, historically speaking, is about the wide receiver 21, turning 28 years old. You're not expecting a player to get better when he's 28 than he was when he was 25, 26, 27. And Terry McLaurin's situation, I would argue, is maybe worse now than it's been, and that you don't really have solid quarterback play. Now, of course, with McLaurin, he's dealt with bad quarterback play his entire NFL career, right? That's nothing new. But with Terry McLaurin, you may have the best weapons surrounding him that he's ever seen. He's been able to dominate the target share in Washington because there's been nobody else. We go back to 2020. The other leading receivers were J.D. McKissick and Logan Thomas. We go to 2021. The second leading receiver in Washington was Adam Humphries. You go to 2022, you have Curtis Samuel. You had a rookie, Jahan Dotson, who missed 5 games. I actually expect Dotson to be much, much better going into this next year and expand his own target share. I think Curtis Samuel, as a wide receiver 3 here, will be better than any wide receiver that Terry McLaurin played with in 2020 or 2021. So yeah, Terry McLaurin, I think he has a ceiling as a mid-wide receiver 2. Right now with McLaurin, you're having to draft him ahead of Joe Mixon in underdog drafts. Just give me Joe Mixon. I mean, Joe Mixon could be a top 10 running back. Now, of course, real quick, if you want to check out any of these player props on Underdog Fantasy, where they have Terry McLaurin sitting at 950 receiving yards and 4 receiving touchdowns for his player prop, or if you want to get into a draft with us, which we are doing every single day on the live stream, you can find a link to Underdog Fantasy in the description or in the comment section. Now is the best time to go check out Underdog as they launched the puppy tournament, which is a $5 buy-in, $500,000 prize pool, $75,000 for first place, which a member of the flock won that last season. And hell, I won $150,000 drafting 700 teams because it's best ball, no time commitment at all during the year. And if you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings plus a free trial to flockfantasy.com. And make sure you're doing that ASAP because before July 22nd, they have the Patrick Mahomes free special bet out there, more than less than half a passing yard. So please make sure you're taking advantage of that with a link in the comment section with promo code FLOCK. Now, our next guy we're going to be looking at, I hate to bring this up, why the hell are people taking Michael Thomas? I understand 2019 Michael Thomas was a great player, right? And trust me, I was the idiot drafting Michael Thomas afterwards. I drafted Michael Thomas in 2020. I drafted Michael Thomas in 2021. But the year's 2023, ladies and gentlemen. Think about the last time Michael Thomas was good at the game of football. The last time Michael Thomas was good at football, we didn't know what a pandemic was. I didn't know what a mask was. Okay, think about how long ago that was. Do we really think he's finally going to be able to put it together? Do we think we finally have Michael Thomas going back to being a wide receiver one in fantasy? The man's going into his age 30 season. I mean, if I'm looking at where he's going right now in underdog drafts, I would much prefer just going ahead and taking a running back in this range. I mean, Michael Thomas is currently going ahead of Alvin Kamara, James Cook, Antonio Gibson, Zach Charbonnet, A.J. Dillon. I would rather have any one of those running backs. I would, rather have Evan Ingram at tight end because what's funny is, are we going to be surprised if Evan Ingram just straight up outscores Michael Thomas this next year, and at the same time you get Evan Ingram at the tight end position, whereas Michael Thomas is playing wide receiver? So I don't know who's drafting Michael Thomas here in round 9. I'm sorry. I've made the mistake in years past as well. Just please, guys, you can't keep on doing this. Now, our next guy we're going to look at, keep it very brief because I've thrown so much dirt on his grave for years now. Cortland Sutton turns 28 in October. And I think maybe it's the Madden dilemma with Cortland Sutton. I think maybe it's the fact that he is a big-bodied alpha wide receiver that people tend to get excited about. I mean, hell, remember, people were trying to convince you that Cortland Sutton was last year's Cooper Kupp. People got that excited about Sutton, despite Cortland Sutton never posting a top 24 wide receiver season from a points per game perspective. The best year he ever had was 2019, where he is the wide receiver 27 from a points per game perspective. Hell, this past season, he was the wide receiver 47. But if you look at Sutton, his situation's probably going to be worse this next year. Now, I understand, yes, you do have Sean Payton coming over, and maybe the overall offense is better. But Tim Patrick's coming back, ladies and gentlemen. Not only is Tim Patrick coming back, but you also draft Marvin Mims in the second round. Jerry Jeudy is stepping into his prime, whereas Cortland Sutton's about to turn 28. So it's kind of the same situation as Michael Thomas. If we go over there to those underdog drafts, hell, how is Evan Ingram going after Cortland Sutton? Evan Ingram should score more points straight up than Cortland Sutton this next year. I'd probably rather be looking at the running backs as well. If you're looking at the player props on underdog, Cortland Sutton's at 725 receiving yards. 4.5 receiving touchdown. I'm probably going to be avoiding Cortland Sutton there, to be honest with you. Now, our next wide receiver is someone that I'm not going to lie to you, I did draft a lot last year. I drafted a lot of Deontay Johnson when he was going round 6 last season. I thought, well, yeah, Ben Roethlisberger's leaving, but Deontay Johnson just averaged 10.5 targets per game. Deontay Johnson was just a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy. I'll draft Deontay Johnson as my wide receiver 3, and I will be happy about it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I was not happy about it. Ladies and gentlemen, I lost a lot of money in those leagues I drafted Deontay Johnson in. And now in these underdog drafts, Deontay Johnson is being drafted right after TJ Hawkinson, Kenneth Walker, Aaron Jones, Justin Herbert, and directly before running backs like J.K. Dobbins, Alexander Mattison, directly before someone like George Kittle, similar to what we were looking at with Michael Thomas, Cortland Sutton, probably being outscored by Evan Ingram. Not going to be a surprise when Deontay Johnson is outscored by George Kittle. Now, I agree. Yes, Deontay Johnson most likely is a wide receiver that will finish ahead of George Pickens in fantasy football. However, we saw some strong red flags last year. I'm not going to focus in on the touchdowns. Deontay Johnson did not score a touchdown, which we know is very random from a year-to-year perspective, and you may see those touchdowns be completely gone one year, and then that player may go out there and score 10 touchdowns the following season. That's pretty much random. But what is extremely concerning are the two things that we look for getting worse. You had Deontay Johnson's targets on a per-game basis going from about 10.5 to 8.5. That's about a 20% drop there, ladies and gentlemen. But more concerningly, you had Deontay Johnson going from 1.9 yards per route run down to 1.5. Now, if you were to get Deontay Johnson maybe in round 7, round 8 of your fantasy football league, I'm all about it. But if you're telling me I have to take him ahead of Justin Herbert, if you're telling me I have to take him next to Kenneth Walker, if you're telling me I need to take him ahead of Dobbins, ahead of George Kittle, where's the real upside here? Even if he goes out there and scores 4 to 5 touchdowns this next year, what, he's going to go from being a mid wide receiver 3 to a high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2? If I was going to bet on a bounce back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, I'd rather bet on Pat Freiermuth. While the offense may be better, Freiermuth is still incredibly young, improving. George Pickens is going into year 2. So even if the offense is better, by no means do I think it's a guarantee that Deontay Johnson himself is better. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for checking out this video and putting up with me. I hope this helped out in some way. And of course, if you want to go check out any of those player props in this video, if you want to get into a draft with us and crush me on the live stream, I'm going to draft every single day until 2024 on Underdog Fantasy. If you sign up with promo code FLOCK, they're going to match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. You're going to get our 2023 fantasy football rankings, get a free trial to flockfantasy.com. Plus, now is the perfect time to do so with the puppy tournament being open, as well as the free Patrick Mahomes line up until July 22nd. Available in damn near every state. You can find that link in the comment section and description. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. Really do appreciate you and really hope that I get to see you in the live stream later today.